Good morning. Welcome to worship with the community of First Unitarian Church of Omaha. I'm Reverend Shari Woodbury, the congregation's minister. A special welcome to visitors. This congregation is a community of all ages and abilities. It's a community with a rainbow of gender and sexual identities. It's a community of diverse cultural and class backgrounds. We draw from many sources of inspiration and share common liberal religious values. Whoever you may be, we welcome you to bring your whole self into this community. Visitors are invited to fill out a visitor form. If you're here in the pews, it's a yellow form in the hymnal racks. If you're online, you'll find a link to an online form below the service description on YouTube. This is a way to find out more about the church, get on the email newsletter list if you'd like to, and so forth. I want to mention that the sermon and service can be quite variable from one Sunday to the next. You never know what you're going to get here. So today is going to be a little bit more historical and scholarly. Come back again for a fuller taste of what this tradition is like if this is your first time. I have a few announcements. The nominating committee invites input from members of the congregation on a couple of things. People who should be considered for leadership positions in the church for the coming year. And also folks that we should be considering for one of the 8 awards that we give out every year at our annual meeting to thank and recognize our amazing volunteers. The online and paper forms for nominations are available as described in the e-blast on Friday, so please submit your form by mid-February. And the other announcement I have is a practical one. If you didn't catch it already, we have a new keypad door lock installed in the courtyard or garden entrance. For security purposes, we're going to be rotating that code periodically, and we're looking to make that change at the beginning of February. So this is a way we're just protecting our members, staff, and guests and making sure we know who's got that door code, because over the years, it really got out there and probably too many people had the code. So if you need the door code, if you're someone who's like the first person in the building to host a group or a meeting, that kind of thing, please see Melissa Gibson, our administrative and membership manager, and she can supply that with you. And please don't share your code with anyone else so that we can keep track of who has the code. Make sense? Okay. We affirm that our church occupies the traditional treaty lands of the Omaha and Otoe-Missouri tribal nations and express our respect as well to the Northern Ponca, Winnebago, and Santee Sioux tribes. We invite everyone to support local causes, charities, and rights of Indigenous peoples. Again, welcome to worship, and welcome to our guest pianist, Brian Stanley. Who I think has prepared a prelude for us. this time, I invite forward Melissa Gibson to light the flaming chalice. Melissa returns safely from her trip to Palestine. We're very glad to have you back. I know there's probably lots of curiosity about that trip, and she's going to be talking about it from the pulpit on February 22nd, so look forward to hearing more. Meanwhile, will you join me in our chalice lighting words? Source of the Spirit, cupped in earth's embrace, light of love, as we kindle this flame, we rekindle our connection to the sacred web of life. Ancestors who spoke with bravest fire, lend us your senses, that we may know another world is on her way, breathed into life with our participation in her creation. Forebears who led the way where there was, at first, no way, lend us your persistence, your temerity, your assurance that the moral arc of the universe does indeed bend towards justice. Ones who went before us, sacrificing for a future not your own. Help us to give of ourselves, that the common stones in our hands today might be cathedrals of compassion. Today, halls of restorative justice. Tomorrow, sheltering walls of beloved community the day after. It is Sunday morning, the day we gather. Let us be thankful and full of praise to be in the company of those who came before, yet are ever in our midst. I invite you to rise if that feels good in your body and join in singing our opening hymn. It's in the teal hymnal, the very first one, Morning Has Come. All right. Christina Strong has a special story to share with those who are young or young of heart. If anyone would like to come forward to see the picture book more clearly. And she's gonna help start us on our theme of our Unitarian and Universalist heritage in the Midwest today.
Good morning, I'm Christina. I'm the coordinator of child and family programs here at First Unitarian. I'd like to invite the young and young at heart forward to look at the picture book, and those of you in the pews that at home can follow along on the screen as we read Dangerous Jane. So this story is about Jane Addams. She lived and worked in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. And we're talking about her today because she worked with a lot of Unitarians and she lived out a lot of the values that are important to Unitarian Universalists, like taking care of each other and justice. And our book is kind of long because she had a very full life and there's a few plot twists, but I'd like you to listen carefully to see if we can figure out why the title is Dangerous Jane. That's a nickname that she was given, so listen carefully so we can, after the book, we'll talk about who gave her this name and why they gave it to her. You can also listen, even though this was over 100 years ago, you can listen for any situations that seem similar to things that you've heard about or seen going on today, and then you can talk about that in your classes afterwards. All right. Jane was born beside a sparkling creek on an Illinois prairie in a friendly town called Cedarville. Her mother died when she was only 2, much too young to understand why Mama never came back, but old enough to know deep sadness and pain. Then a disease made Jane's back crooked, her toes pointed in. She felt like the ugly duckling in her storybook, different, unwanted, hopeless. Jane had few friends, but she always had her father. The two read piles of books together, went on long walks, and enjoyed trips into town to see their favorite sights. One day, Jane and her father passed through the poor side of town, filled with new sights she'd never seen. Small, rundown shacks, sad, hungry parents, cold, barefoot children. Jane's heart ached, a strong, familiar ache. She knew how it felt to be sad, rejected, without hope. Jane wanted to help those families, but their problems were too big for a small girl to fix. So Jane promised herself that when she grew up, she would buy a big house to share with people in need. The years passed quickly. Time for Jane to leave home, get married, and start a family. That's what people believed women were supposed to do in her time. But Jane had plans of her own, college and a career helping others. She studied hard, graduated at the top of her class, and set off to learn about the world. Jane saw statues in Italy, operas in France, and castles in Ireland. Determined to keep her long-ago promise to help struggling families, Jane set sail for home, dreaming of her, oops, I think I skipped a page. Sorry about that, okay. But in England, she saw something quite different. She saw starving people spending their last pennies on rotten vegetables. Jane felt that familiar ache in her heart. Poverty seemed to be everywhere. How could she help? Then she heard about Toynbee Hall, a settlement house in London that helped poor people help themselves by providing skills, confidence, dignity, a new start in life. So Jane visited that house where guests learned to read and write, discovered art and history, attended concerts and classes, and it gave her an idea. Determined to keep her long-ago promise to help struggling families, Jane set sail for home, dreaming of her own settlement house, where immigrants who worked 2 long days at back-breaking jobs for next to nothing pay could find help. Jane searched Chicago and found a big brick building in the perfect place, near families in desperate need, but the old house was far from perfect. Broken windows, peeling paint, crooked doors. Undaunted, Jane traveled all over town, asking wealthy women for donations to turn this broken-down building into a home, a settlement called Hull House. In 1889, Jane swung the front doors wide open. Everyone was welcome, anytime. Working 18 hours a day, she provided whatever her neighbors needed. English lessons, childcare, wash tubs, steady work, but most important, she gave friendship, dignity, and hope. Families flocked to Jane's big house. Immigrants from Italy, Greece, Russia, Ireland, Germany, Poland, and more. Sometimes they argued about beliefs and ideas, so Jane asked them to listen carefully, respect one another, and peacefully settle their differences. And everyone at Hull House got along fine. It seemed everybody loved Jane, at Hull House, in Chicago, across the country. Neighbors called her Miss Kind Heart. Newspapers named her Saint Jane. President Roosevelt wrote her a letter of sincere thanks. The New York Evening Post even wanted Jane to run for president. But while Jane was talking peace, Europe was talking war. Countries argued over land, money, and power. They built weapons and trained armies. On July 28, 1914, Jane read the horrible news. World War I had begun. Within days, more nations joined in to help their friends, to defend their land, to protect their citizens. Many soldiers died in the brutal battles. Families were forced from their villages. More people than ever were homeless, starving. Jane's caring heart ached like never before. It ached for the world. For 25 years, she'd helped people from different countries live in peace at Hull House. But what could Jane do to stop a war? Jane knew exactly what to do. She brought women across America together to form the Women's Peace Party and find a way to end the war. Overseas, women heard about Jane. They longed for peace too, so they organized a gathering in the Netherlands. The International Congress of Women needed a brave leader. They needed Jane. Jane joined 1,500 women from 12 countries, all determined to work together for peace. The women debated for days, searching for bold new ways to stop the war. They created 20 resolutions, ideas for peace to share with world leaders. Newspapers called their plans silly. Women cooked, cleaned, and cared for children. What could women say to presidents and prime ministers? Jane knew what to say. War-weary, road-weary, she crisscrossed 14 countries. She shared her peace resolutions with the British Prime Minister, the French Foreign Minister, the Austrian Prime Minister, and even the Pope. Jane understood that war was complicated, but she believed each idea, each visit, each smile and handshake made another small step toward peace. She wrote hundreds of letters, led peace conferences, and pleaded with warring nations to talk to each other, and more importantly, to listen. After 4 bloody years, the war ended in 1918. Finally, peace. No time to rest, Jane packed her bags again, sailed across that ocean again. Her tired heart was breaking for faraway neighbors in war-torn countries. She visited children in hospitals and fed starving families. Back home, some people didn't like who Jane helped, strangers in other countries, or how Jane helped them, giving away precious food. Dark lies swirled around her like an angry tornado. Some said Jane was a traitor. Did she care more about former enemies in faraway countries than her own neighbors next door? Jane received nasty letters from people all around the country, people she'd never even met. When she gave speeches, the crowds that once loved her booed her off the stage. Then the FBI named Jane the most dangerous woman in America. What would Jane do now? Jane kept doing what she'd always done, helping people, no matter where they were from, no matter what others thought, no matter what the cost, year after year after year. But something changed in 1931. Dangerous Jane was given a new name, Nobel laureate. Jane Addams was the first American woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize. Jane had never paid much attention to what others said or the names people called her. She just kept right on working for world peace, for people in need, for the rest of her life. The end. All right, who noticed, how did she get the name Dangerous Jane? Go ahead.
After the war, it sort of like made everyone think like, don't give anyone just don't give people names and stuff.
Okay, so they were upset about who she was helping, and who gave her that name?
The
The FBI, right? Her own country gave her that name.
What does the FBI stand for?
The Federal Bureau of Investigation. It's a federal agency that investigates. And so she just kept on doing her work anyway, and then eventually public opinion changed again, and they gave her the Nobel Peace Prize. All right, sing our children to the classes.
Each week, we put into practice our spiritual value of generosity as we take up a community offering. Half of undesignated gifts go to a local cause, which resonates with the Unitarian Universalist values. If you're online or would rather use your smartphone, you can use the QR code or link. For January, our Share the Plate recipient is North Omaha Community Partnership. It provides emergency food and services to residents of North Omaha who are in crisis situations. Their mission is to rebuild, uplift, and empower the North Omaha community. During the music, you are also welcome to come forward to place a stone in the bowl to represent a joy or challenge or sorrow in your life, the lives of your loved ones, or our wider world. I'll invite Colin forward to help share joys and concerns that our members have wished to have shared aloud. As he comes up, I want to acknowledge in sorrow the senseless death this weekend of Alex Preddy in Minneapolis. He was a 37-year-old ICU nurse and veteran who helped a woman that ICE agents had shoved and was then targeted himself. A very, very sad pattern.
From Sandy Bruins, saying my heart is breaking for the people of Minnesota as our federal government, headed by our quote-unquote Nobel Peace President, makes war on them, as well as on all of us who dare to exist in this country. From Caitlin Goldner, saying sending love and peace to a family of Alex Preddy and all those in Minneapolis who are hurting. From Nellie, saying my heart is sad for our country. From UU The Vote via Melissa Gibson, saying, for those who are interested, there is a protest at 72nd and Dodge today from 1 to 4 p.m. Join others to peacefully denounce the actions of ICE in Minnesota and the mourning across our country.
As we hold all of those in our hearts, as well as all of those joys and challenges represented by the stones, will you join me in singing number 123, Spirit of Life? On the wings of this music, I invite you into a time of contemplation. You may wish to check how you're seated with your spine erect. Perhaps rest your eyes, perhaps your hands in your lap. I'll begin by sharing a centering poem, and then we'll have some silence. We'll just rest together in the quiet, and you may offer your own inward prayer or reflection at that time. First, these heartfelt words of Ellie Kilpatrick. Winter winds rip through streets and homes, peering through the coats of collective power. They rage, they hate, they run. Colder and colder they run. But the winds find a barrier in us, a collective force that withstands and rejects the howling venom. Because the flame never dies. The flame of solidarity and hope abounds. It rises, it grows, it glows. No winds or ice can take it or tame it. And so we confound the winds with our flame. Though in eternity it seems, the flame will bring spring. The great melt will come. Shine on, beloveds, the winds have nothing on you. A time for your own inward prayer or meditation. The American Midwest was the most democratic place in the world as it took shape in the 19th century. So writes John Locke in his 2022 history of the Midwest in the 1800s, titled The Good Country. Let me say that again. The American Midwest was the most democratic place in the world as it took shape in the 19th century. I'm not sure if it feels ironic or prescient that I scheduled this topic for a week when our democracy is dramatically under assault in the Midwest. I feel sadness, shock, grief, anger, frozenness, fear, determination. In recent days, I have been taking in some of the news, not all of it, got to modulate things. I've been particularly watching the testimony of colleagues who either serve in the Twin Cities area or who traveled there in support of local people late this past week. And I'm cognizant that many people in this congregation have connections to Minneapolis, St. Paul, have lived there, have had families there, have families there now. One voice of testimony came from Mel Duncan. He's co-founder of Nonviolent Peace Force, a major unarmed peacekeeping NGO. Duncan just returned from Gaza to his home in the Twin Cities a few days ago. Nonviolence Radio interviewed him about what he was seeing in Minnesota and how he makes sense of it. Duncan said, "Little did I know that I would be leaving one occupied territory in Palestine and be returning to my home in the Twin Cities to another occupied territory. Just as the settlers on the West Bank and the Israeli police, backed up by the Israeli army, patrol the area with impunity in the West Bank, I was in the Jordan Valley," Duncan explained, "where the settlers would attack at will the shepherds and the farmers and would take their land and beat people. That's what was happening on the streets of St. Paul and Minneapolis. That is what's happening right now, where they are attacking primarily people of color and taking them indiscriminately off the streets with impunity, no accountability, taking them to holding cells in federal buildings near the airport and taking them to points unknown." Duncan went on to describe some of the most egregious things that have happened, like ICE using an 8-year-old child as bait to draw out his father before capturing them both. And as I read, their family is actually here on asylum. Other terrible things happened yesterday, as was addressed in the Joys and Concerns after the interview that I heard with Duncan. I don't think it's a coincidence that the administration has chosen Minnesota for this show of force, though I doubt they anticipated how effectively the community would respond. Not only are they attacking a winter people in the winter, they are attacking Midwesterners who are caring neighbors, who are practical people, and who have been building their skills since George Floyd and before. Mel Duncan told Nonviolence Radio, "We're not waiting for the story of nonviolence to happen here. It is happening. I've lived here for over 50 years, he said, and I've never seen the Twin Cities so well organized on multiple levels. There are thousands of people who are acting, are being creative, and are carrying out nonviolent action in very creative ways." He describes people taking groceries to scared neighbors, driving others to school and work, providing a protective presence in the neighborhoods and outside schools, which was just what Duncan himself was doing in the West Bank, supporting immigrant-owned businesses, mass demonstrations, and more. The past is prologue. I think it was Shakespeare who said that. The past is prologue. John Locke, the historian, tells us the old Midwest could be a reservoir of idealism and hope if we knew its history. Maybe this knowledge will bolster our spirits, provide a light, and help guide us out of the current darkness and loneliness and cynicism. Well, it is with hope that I share with you today on the topic of our Midwest heritage, both our heritage as Midwesterners in general, and specifically as Unitarian Universalists in this region. This is the first in an occasional sermon series on the topic and lays the groundwork for the series. And by the way, if you're not from the Midwest, it doesn't matter. You're here now. Add yourself to the mix. If you're new to Unitarian Universalism, likewise, this is a faith of a lot of commenters. Welcome. We're glad you're here. Let's start with culture. Here I turn to the work of Colin Woodard in his 2011 book, American Nations. He's a historian, and his thesis is that the United States consists of 11 different regions with distinct cultures that have shaped its history and continue to shape our present. And this map shows the location of those 11 regions or nations, as Woodard has named them. You might be able to discern, depending on how close you are to the screen, that eastern Nebraska and most of Iowa are in a region he calls the Midlands. Its cultural roots go back to Philadelphia and reflects the aspiration to be a model society rooted in Quaker religion and culture. It was egalitarian, rejecting hierarchy in religion and gender relations, and suspicious of slavery. Now, Germans from other religious sects immigrated to Pennsylvania later and joined the Quakers there. They shared the Quakers' moral and religious objection to slavery and molded into Midlands culture. As they spread westward into the heartland, Midlands people brought with them a pluralistic culture. Woodard writes that the Midland Midwest would develop as a center of moderation and tolerance, where people of many faiths and ethnicities lived side by side, largely minding their own business. As you might be able to see on the map, southern portions of Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and Missouri are part of the culture of Greater Appalachia. So there's actually 3 different regions by Woodard's definition that are part of the Midwest. The other one I'm most interested in, besides the Midlands, which we are in, for our purposes today, is actually the one to the north of us, which is Yankeedom. The upper Midwest, including our friends in Minnesota, traces its cultural roots to New England, most influenced by its English heritage and Puritan roots. Woodard explains that the Yankees represent an extreme example of public Protestantism, a religious heritage that emphasizes collective salvation and the social gospel. Despite the continuing waves of immigration that have occurred in this country since these regional cultures of the U.S. formed, those cultures stuck and continue to feed into cultural and political divides. Actually, I've seen some analysis of even recent elections that supports that this culture is still that strong force there. In later waves, immigrants favored regions most welcoming to them. And one of 2 that Woodward wrote had been explicitly multicultural since its foundation was the Midlands. The American model of cultural pluralism, Woodard says, originates in the traditions of 2 nations. New Netherlands, what became New York City and its greater surrounding area, and the Midlands. As I was thinking about this in relation to our faith tradition and exploring also John Locke's history of the 1800s Midwest in a book called The Good Country, I saw fascinating parallels with the development of Unitarianism as it moved westward in that same period. They're all intertwined, really, but those parallels involve democratic culture, both politically and culturally, an embrace of learning throughout the lifespan as a core cultural characteristic, a flatter social class structure, and pragmatic attitudes out here on the plains and prairies. John Locke traces how the democratic culture of the Midwest starts with the legal charter for the region. He writes that the charter yielded freestanding sovereign states that ensured the rights of citizens and contributed to the steady erosion of various forms of aristocratic privilege persisting elsewhere around the world. So that was really unique to this region from its beginnings. He further writes, a mixture of Christian denominations, instilled a basic morality, but also fostered a degree of pluralism and toleration and theological freedom not present in other polities dominated by one religious sect. Now, state charters also were created democratically, each one including a detailed Bill of Rights. Locke says these democratic documents were reinforced by a culture held open by settlers from varying regions and ethnic groups who embraced egalitarian norms and eagerly sought to participate in democratic life and an economic system open to all comers. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787, which established the region, explicitly provided for public education. Each township had to set aside land for a school. Per Locke, I thought this was interesting, Iowa, Nebraska, and Kansas saw enrollment of over 90% of school-aged children by the end of the 19th century and led the entire nation at that date. In fact, the Midwest produced the most literate people in the nation. A book culture was big in the Midwest too, as our book club members will be glad to hear. And not just in schools, there were also major book publishers, bookstores, print publications that were thriving. Libraries, Locke notes, were common public projects. The Midwest would later see the building of more Carnegie libraries than any other region. There's also a lively lecture circuit. It looked to me like kind of the original self-help culture, especially popular with the young and ambitious. Higher education flourished in the Midwest as well. One history described the region as thickly strewn with colleges and universities. Like the schools for younger ages, the colleges incorporated character development and vocational subjects like agriculture, as well as being co-ed from the start. Many colleges had religious affiliations and strong social agendas related to social reform. There were also land-grant universities. Now, the social life of Midwesterners in the 1800s included not only church programs and school activities, but book groups, literary societies, all kinds of civic clubs and improvement efforts. As its regional culture and identity was formed, the Midwest contrasted with both the South and the Northeast, the two other regions in existence really at that time. It was a land of educated, civically engaged people, most of whom, as Locke put it, were farmers who prospered on the fertile lands of the region and lived in rough equality with their neighbors. Another scholar, Jess Gilbert, concluded that, quote, the late 19th century rural Midwest was substantially a one-class society. That made it different from the slave-holding South, the industrial Northeast, and Europe. All of those were more aristocratic than the middle-class Midwest. During the Civil War, Locke reports that over half of the Union's troops would come from the Midwest, even though the region constituted only a quarter of the country's population. The Midwest provided nearly all of Lincoln's generals and most of his cabinet. Turning back to Woodard's groups in American nations, the Midlands formed a bloc with Yankees and New Netherlands against a Southern bloc or Dixie bloc in causes like the abolition of slavery and women's suffrage. Despite its frequent alliance with New England, though, the Midwest developed its own identity and pushed back against feared hegemony in the East in terms of culture. That included distinct Midwestern voices in arts and literature and appreciation for the natural wonders of the region. I think all of these qualities are on display in Minneapolis right now. The pragmatic ways people are helping their neighbors across any lines of class or culture, and how Minnesotans and their allies are embracing democratic and civic spirit at the most local level, school by school, and block by block. Resisting outside domination. Those were Locke's words. Resisting outside domination as armed and masked ICE agents swarm through neighborhoods. That phrase is thrust into the present. Resisting outside domination. One of our Unitarian Universalist clergy who traveled to Minneapolis for a day of action described just yesterday being boxed in by ICE with a group crowded into a local store, unable to get out even if they wanted to. Lucas Hergert, who serves our congregation in Deerfield, Illinois, wrote, this was just yesterday on social media, "They are sending buses to arrest us and prepping rubber bullets, deploying tear gas, beating us with truncheons. This is America now. It's just the start. Choose your side." It feels surreal to me, like I've been transported back to the era of Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement, truncheons, rubber bullets. These images of violence coming across screens and reports of what is happening on the ground from activists working so hard to de-escalate tense situations and prevent harm where they can. Another colleague, Oscar Sinclair, formerly serving in Lincoln and now in St. Paul, who I think gave the charge to the congregation at my installation from this pulpit, was one of the clergy arrested in the Twin Cities airport on Friday. He was released and is okay. Our forebears came to a point where they had to choose a side in the Civil War and again in the civil rights movement of their day. Domination is on the move again, and it is time to resist. That brings us back to the Unitarian Universalist part of this pattern in our Midwest history. I'm going to draw here from Freedom Moves West, a history of the westward movement of Unitarianism, which was published in 1952. It was written by Charles H. Little. And if you have read your Pillars and Dreams history of this church, you may recall that Little briefly served this very congregation. It was around 1920, before he went to Meadville to serve on the faculty of one of our Unitarian seminaries. I'm going to focus today on one particular Unitarian who is one of my heroes and integral to this story. Someone posed the question a few weeks ago. We had an Ask the Minister Sunday. Someone asked about what historical Unitarians and Universalists I felt people should know more about. And one of those people for me is Jenkin Lloyd Jones. Jones grew up in Wisconsin and knew he wanted to become a Unitarian minister someday. He went to Meadville Theological School, then based in Meadville, Pennsylvania. The Midlands. Meadville would later move to Chicago, which is actually kind of on the border between the Midlands and Yankeedom of the North. And Chicago is where Meadville was when I attended seminary there. As I describe Jenkin Lloyd Jones' service to our faith in the Midwest, see how many parallels you can spot with what I've already shared about the region. Early in his ministry, Jones championed religious education. As Little tells it, Jones abandoned the catechetical question-answer memorizations, as well as the preachy story lessons. Jones instead favored a more interactive, practical, and character development approach that paired the best of universal secular culture with religious ideals. He expanded adult activities too, including a mutual improvement club that had all kinds of programming. The model Jones advocated for religious education was well received by Unitarians. He spread it through a publication created for that purpose. And it was especially well received in the Western Conference. And when I say Western Conference, you have to understand that at that time, it was Western in relation to New England, and so it really was mainly the Midwest that we were talking about with the Western Conference. Although there also were churches started in that period in Denver and even on the West Coast. Tensions with the American Unitarian Association back in Boston, which was subsidizing clergy in the West and potentially excluding those it perceived as radicals, led the Western Conference to assert its independence. By funding its own missionary work, the conference could continue its efforts unhindered by the Eastern establishment. Jones had championed this idea, and his peers appointed him the first leader of this work for the Midwestern Conference. As mission secretary, Little writes, Jones visited distressed churches, dormant churches, isolated groups of radicals, liberals that aspired to become church societies, gatherings of delegates to forum state conferences, and so on. He comes across as frugal, resourceful, diligent, and passionate for the cause of liberal religion in the Midwest. It was not an easy scene, but he was undeterred. Under Jones' leadership, the number of active societies, churches, blossomed, debt dropped, more state conferences of Unitarian churches were formed, and the power of the Midwestern Conference and the denomination grew, to the point that the AUA, American Unitarian Association, declared their confidence and impartial support for the work of the Western Conference and the ministers placed there. Now, Jones was not only a pragmatist, but a feminist as well. Another reason he's one of my UU heroes. He supported the leadership of women on church boards, denominational bodies, as speakers, and then as ministers. Perhaps you've heard about the Iowa Sisterhood. I grabbed an Iowa mug today. The Iowa Sisterhood were women ministers. They started in Iowa and were concentrated there, but expanded into other parts of the West and beyond, Midwest and beyond. Another scholar, Holly Ulbrich, describes them like this. The women of the Iowa Sisterhood generally approached ministry differently from their male counterparts, with less emphasis on the intellectual Sunday sermon and more focus on pastoral care and social ministry within the community. These women clergy were also more egalitarian and more open to experimentation that was less anchored to tradition than congregations in the Northeast. Now, champions of the free-thinking Western attitude, according to Little, were, like Jones, social radicals in fidelity to the long Channing Parker tradition in American Unitarianism, which was the most socially conscious wing, I would say, which antedated by decades the social gospel of Walter Rauschenbusch and others, as well as Christian socialism. So this whole social gospel thing, we actually got there first and brought it to the Midwest. Humanitarian work by Unitarians in the Western Conference included addressing poverty, which, by the way, included impoverishment of indigenous peoples, humane treatment of animals, temperance, women's rights, and support for immigrants and Black Americans migrating northward, like the story we heard earlier about Jane Addams and the Hull House in Chicago. Beyond the Western Unitarian Conference and his role in fostering the spread of liberal religion westward, Jenkins Lloyd-Jones is actually best known for organizing the World Parliament of Religions in Chicago in 1893. And this is not unrelated to his Unitarianism. Open curiosity toward other faiths was developing in Western Unitarianism alongside religious humanism. Now, if you're not familiar with humanism, it focuses on human worth and the human capability to improve life, with particular concern for social injustice and remedies. Humanists exhibited a quality of spiritual democrats who respect people regardless of whether they are atheists, agnostics, theists, however they might define themselves. And Little notes that another aspect of the dawning humanism in that era was appreciation of truth in non-Christian religions. I've slipped in a number of teasers today for future installments of this Midwest Heritage Series. More to come on the role of women in the Midwest culture and Midwestern liberal religion. More to come on racial failures and advances, other social reforms, and religious humanism. Plus, we need to get to the Universalist side of our UU family tree, too. So all that in the future. The through line I want to convey today is that the geographic expansion of Unitarianism coincided with the expansion of our tradition's identity in theology, class, and culture. They went together. Unitarianism had emerged in New England back in the 1820s when folks who pushed back against narrow theological thinking and rigid creeds were pushed out of what is now Congregationalism, the United Church of Christ. The boundaries of liberal religion would be tested again by humanism, by the role of women, by world religions. And the Western Conference, the Midwest, was where this tension in Unitarianism most palpably played out, both within the conference, but especially between these more expansive-minded, less class-bound Unitarians in the Midwest and the Eastern Unitarians, the establishment. Unitarian Universalism would not be as we know it today if not for the ways that people of pioneering spirit, people embracing Midwestern culture, stretched it. So here's my invitation to you. I invite you to lean into these qualities that are so Midwestern and so Midwest Unitarian as our moment in history calls us to do. How can we carry forward the rich heritage of democracy and politics and culture? How can we support continued access to the kind of education and critical thought on which functioning democracy depends? How can we build alliances across social classes and create a flatter economic structure, or at least one without poverty inescapably built into it? And how can we use our Midwestern pragmatism in service of our values of pluralism, justice, equity, generosity? Let us awaken both our caring Midwestern culture and our broad religious sensibilities. Let us draw upon our down-to-earth, democratic heritage as we resist outside domination. Can I get an amen? One more time. Amen. Amen, and blessed be. We're going to sing all 5 verses of this hymn because I think you'll want it. Number 298, you can rise. Wake now, my senses. And gratitude to our cultural and religious forebears, and mindful of those lives who we will in turn shape through our choices now. Let us embrace the best of our heritage, an abiding love for democracy and education, a wide sense of community and readiness to come to the aid of any neighbor who needs it, and a can-do spirit that will not be deterred by harsh conditions or domination. Let us hold fast to one another and to all that we hold dear. So may it be. Amen.